The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Yo, Philly, how you's doing? Welcome to Philadelphia Baseball, past, present, and personal. I'm Bill Kashatus, your host on the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. This week, I'm pleased to have as my guest Jim Lonborg. Although he was nicknamed Gentleman Jim, Lonborg was known for fearlessly pitching inside. His best year came in 1967 with the Boston Red Sox when he won the Cy Young Award, leading American League pitchers with 22 wins, 39 games started, and 246 strikeouts. In 1973, Jim was traded to the Phillies, where he spent the next 6.5 seasons. Along with Steve Carlton, Lonborg anchored the starting rotation that would allow a young group of Phillies to develop and capture 3 straight NL Eastern Division titles between 1976 and 1978. Those Phillies would go on to capture the organization's first World Championship in 1980, but by that time Lonborg had retired from baseball and returned to New England, where he opened a dental practice. But Gentleman Jim completed his 15-year career with an impressive 157 wins, 90 complete games, 1,475 strikeouts, and a 3.86 ERA. He was inducted into the Boston Red Sox Hall of Fame in 2002. Welcome to the podcast, Jim.
Hi, Bill. How you doing today?
Great. Listen, you played for the Red Sox between 1965 and 1971, and were the Cy Young Award winner in '67, as I mentioned. You pitched for the Milwaukee Brewers in '72 before coming to Philadelphia the next year. What was it like coming to the Phillies, a last-place club, in 1973 after being with a winning organization like Boston?
Well, it was odd in the sense that we had just the year before been traded from Boston to Milwaukee. Again, I think we were a last-place team there, too, so the transition from one last-place team to another wasn't that difficult. It was exciting in a sense that I was now going to get a chance to pitch in the National League against players that, I had never faced before. Exciting to know that I was going to have an opportunity to pitch with Steve Carlton, who had a phenomenal year in Philadelphia. So, we didn't think too much about whether we were, going from one last-place team to another team. I had a really good year in Milwaukee in '72, so I was confident that I was going to be able to bring some skills to the Phillies when we got traded there.
Now, you were in the same starting rotation as Carlton between 1973 and 1979, but you had faced Carlton in the '67 World Series when you were with Boston and he was with the St. Louis Cardinals. I believe it was Game 5 of that World Series that you faced off against each other, and you posted a complete game victory by a score of 3-1. What do you remember about that game and Carlton?
Well, it was, again, an exciting time for us. Number one, the '67 team, had not been, picked to come anywhere near close to winning a pennant, and so we were riding a high, just winning the American League championship that year. I think when we got to St. Louis, we were down 3-1. Bob Gibson won game number 2. Game number 1. I won game number 2. And then the Cardinals won 3 and 4. So I was coming back to pitch in St. Louis against the Cardinals. And Steve happened to be the opposing pitcher. It wasn't a good day for him to face me because I had a really great game. Was able to carry through from my game 2 victory. I do remember that I had a shutout going into the bottom of the 9th inning in St. Louis, and I threw probably the only changeup I'd thrown the whole game to a guy by the name of Roger Maris, who was very comfortable hitting home runs, and he popped one out of the park, or else I would have had a two-hit shutout against the Cardinals. The first game was a one-hit shutout, and that would have been a nice little feather to have in one's historical book with regard to pitching efforts. So it was, I can't remember what kind of a hitter he was. I know that he, once he got over to the Phillies, he became a notoriously pretty, good bat at the plate, but I can't remember what he did against me. But it was just a pleasure to finally be on the same team with him.
Yeah, I remember when you came over after the 72 season. Of course, Carlton had won the Cy Young Award for that season in the National League, and how excited we as Phillies fans were because, of course, we were forever in last place, and now we had two Cy Young Award winners in the starting rotation. Of course, Carlton back at that time was, I guess it would be that year, 73, where he stopped talking to the press and became, I don't want to say antagonistic towards particularly the Philadelphia Daily News, who was pretty tough on him. But was not as amenable to their requests for interviews starting at that period of time, and I think it did a lot of success. Same time, I think he was an interesting leader, definitely for the pitching staff and for the team as a whole, because he was used to winning. What was it like pitching in the same rotation with him?
Well, Bill, it was awesome. When I came into the clubhouse, I found out that I had been lockered right next to Steve. I didn't know him at all. I knew that of his phenomenal talents, and I did know a little bit about the issues that he was having with the press at the time. But it turned out to be one of the best things that ever happened in my career, because Steve came from a different set of mind mentally about how to pitch in the big leagues, and he became a mentor to me with regard to your responsibilities as a pitcher, your game preparation as a pitcher, your responsibilities to how to respond to umpires' calls, to show no emotion, to not respond to the presence of a hitter at the plate, and mentally just helped me become a more positive person when I walked out onto the mound to face opposing hitters. It was truly a great experience for me, and he was very instrumental in me having some successful years with the Phillies when I was healthy.
Now, I'm sure that Boston was a pretty tough town when you played there as well, because they were kind of the bridesmaids left at the altar for so many years, not being able to clinch a World Series. Tough sports towns, both Philadelphia and Boston, have a wonderful fan base, huge fan base, but the sports media can be pretty tough, and I understand that you experienced some rough time when you first came to Philly. So is that an accurate comparison between Philly and Boston? How would you compare the two cities? Because we still have here in Philadelphia a fascination with Boston till this day.
I had heard about the reputation of the Phillies fans, and it didn't affect me one way or another because I hadn't experienced it. But I did get off to a rough start the first month in Philly. I was having trouble getting through the first 2 or 3 innings, and so there were a lot of times when I'd be pulled out of a game after the second or third inning, and after the third or fourth time, it wasn't a pleasant experience to walk off the mound. I know sometimes my wife would be there with a couple of our kids, and our kids would say, "Why are they booing Daddy?" And I had to explain to them that they weren't really booing me personally. They were just booing the guy that was wearing the uniform on that particular day, not having a good day. And so it was, I don't know whether it was just an adjustment to the new league or the new hitters or the AstroTurf that was there at Veterans Stadium. But it did take me a while, but, once you start winning ball games, you can win fan support back again, and I think we were able to do that in the following years.
Was that just a reflection of trying too hard on your part, being in a new town, third team in 3 years, I guess?
I'm not sure whether it was trying, too hard. I think a lot of it was, not having enough knowledge as I had with American League hitters, with National League hitters. It's kind of a little bit different style of play, a little bit more aggressive, both at the plate and on the base paths. So it was just one of those things I had to work through, and thankfully, we figured it all out, and I went on to have some pretty good years with the Phillies.
Mm-hmm. Now, your finest season in Philadelphia came in 1976. You posted an 18-10 record and a league-leading 3.08 ERA. What do you recall about this season, especially clinching against Montreal on September 26th in a game that you pitched?
It was just one of those years where I was able to stay healthy the whole year. I had had some intermittent problems with my shoulder, and we finally figured out the right program to stay strong through the season. Obviously, pitching with that team, it was a thrill to know that you were going to go out and have hitters like we had, who would score you 5-6 runs a game. And any pitcher will tell you if they know they're going to get that many runs a game, they're going to, have a pretty decent season. Along with the great defense that we had with Mike Schmidt and Larry Boa and Gary Maddox, it was just a perfect team to pitch for. And again, it was mainly just staying healthy the whole year. And to be the winning pitcher on that night that we beat Montreal was a really cool thing. I think Greg Lazinski hit a big home run that night to kind of seal the deal. But it's always fun to be the pitcher of record when you're in a championship season like that. It's a pretty cool deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one correction, because you wouldn't forgive me if I didn't say it. Mike Schmidt hit that home run on September 20th.
Okay.
Because I remember that one vividly. That'll stay in my mind for the rest of my life, because the dugout just erupted, and I remember him showing, and he very rarely showed emotion, but I remember, some great emotion back at that time.
I stand corrected, Bill. Thank you.
And actually, I hope I'm not messing that up with 1980, because I know he hit a home run in 1982 also as well up in Montreal to clinch. So I might be the one to be staying corrected. But, in 1976 in the league championship series, you hit the Reds for 5 innings before surrendering 4 runs and taking the loss in the 6th. That had to be a great game for you, but I think there was an inevitability because of the power of that Reds team, which of course went on to take I guess it was the second of 2 World Series or back-to-back World Series that year. You just, you had a feeling that with people like Bench, Foster, Perez, and Rose in the lineup, it was just a matter of time. I mean, they could come back. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's what happened. Although they didn't hit the homers off you, I believe that was, that's what happened in that game. I think, was it Foster and Bench that came up and homered?
It was a long time ago, Bill, and I don't have a space in my brain to remember bad moments like that. I try to erase them. But I do remember, having the no-hitter going for the first 4 innings, and I had really good stuff. But as you said, they had a formidable lineup, from top to bottom, and they always kept putting pressure on you. And, whatever happened, whether balls got through or I just made bad pitches. It doesn't take long for a team like the Big Red Machine to kind of get under your skin and make things difficult for you.
Now, the following year, 1977, the Phillies fielded arguably the very best team in baseball, and many baseball historians say that 77 team was even better than the 1980 edition that went on to take the World Series. That 77 team had everything. It had a great starting rotation with you, Carlton, Larry Christensen, Randy Lurch, and Jim Cott. It had a great bullpen with Tug McGraw as the closer. It had power hitters in Schmidt, Luzinski, and Hebner. It had great defense up the middle with Boone at catcher, Larry Bowa at short, Ted Sizemore at second, and Maddox in center. But that team lost to the Dodgers in the NLCS. What happened with that team? Why, for the second year, wasn't it able to get over that hump?
It's hard to say. Looking back, again, when you get into that position where you're in the playoffs, you're obviously playing the top teams in all of baseball. The Dodgers that year being one of them. They had maybe not as formidable as a hitting lineup as we did, but they still had, Ron Say and Steve Garvey, a lot of great ball players, and they had a really good pitching staff. So we were evenly matched, and I think it came down to a couple of funky plays. I think we won one game in Philadelphia against Bert Hooton where I think we booed him, or the fans, the wonderful Philly fans, booed him off the mound pretty much. He got into a lot of trouble, and they let him know it. But I think there was one little play in the outfield because all the games were pretty close except for, I think, the game that I pitched. I gave up. I think I had a really good record against them during the regular season, so I felt very confident about pitching on the mound in Dodger Stadium. And then I had Dusty Baker, I think 0-2 or 1-2, and I decided to throw him a sidearm curveball because I hadn't thrown him the whole game, and I hung it up out over the plate where he could hit it, and I think he got a grand slam with it, and really, Carpenter, the team owner, he still kind of rides me about, why the heck did you even consider throwing that pitch? And I said, I've always just told him I thought it was a good idea at the time, but it just didn't work out. So, what happened, I think we just got shut down by a good Dodger pitching staff, and, a couple of key games we weren't able to pull off, and, they were able to defeat us.
Now, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier because the game of pitching has changed so dramatically since your big league career ended. But you did mention some things in reference to Carlton that I think you guys pioneered. For example, I know when Carlton was pitching in Philadelphia, almost from the start, you had something called a mood room, where the whole room was dark. There was just like some kind of screen or some kind of painting on the wall just to focus. There was a big easy chair in there. And I know at least Carlton used to go in there, but he was huge on mental acuity drills and mental discipline. The other thing, and this was because of Gus Hoffling, and I'm sure you had experience with Gus because you had injuries, was the physical preparation. Carlton got into, some of the Eastern arts to focus, but also had these weird strengthening exercises, like slowly pushing his left arm down into a barrel full of rice. now, maybe not those exercises, but the whole aspect of the mental approach to pitching is huge in today's game. They start in the minor leagues using things like Harvey Dorfman's book, The Mental ABCs of Pitching. Talk a little bit about that. I mean, that whole aspect was pretty non-existent when you were pitching. Isn't that correct?
That is correct. Prior to the early 70s, at least with the Phillies, pitching was just a matter of getting physically ready, and then a lot of pitchers would keep books, on how they got people out. And I know that Bobby Wine, one of our coaches, started keeping records on where opposing hitters would hit baseballs. Keep charts very similar. He was probably one of the first guys to use analytical evaluation on how to, place outfielders against certain hitters and stuff like that. But one of the things that happened is that I think Mr. Carpenter really ran across a guy by the name of Gus Heffling, who was working with Eagles at the time with regard to strength training and stuff, and he liked what he had to say, and he brought him over to it. He brought an experience as a martial arts trainer from China, and implemented a lot of the techniques. One of them being working with your hands and the rice to develop strength in the muscles of your forearm. And I bought into that because I thought it was, very helpful. I never ever had any problems with my elbow after that at all through that strength. But the other thing that happened, Bill, was that a lot of us got into transcendental meditation, and it became a very, I think, effective tool to, especially for a pitcher, to clear your head before you went out on the mound. And, yeah, we did have a quiet room, and you could go in there and meditate for 20 or 30 minutes before you start. That was very, very helpful for me also. I had like 3 or 4 kids at the time, and to leave the house, with a lot of screaming going on, and being able to come in the clubhouse and prepare for your start, the meditation was very good. And as you mentioned, Steve Carlton became the biggest advocate of Gus Heffling's techniques, to the point where normally pitchers would run to stay in shape. You'd always see them in the outfield running. I started to do a lot of long-distance running. But Mr. Heffling was able to develop a technique where you could do all of your workouts in these different rice arenas. And Steve Carlton, who hated to run, found it to his liking. And so he became a great advocate. And obviously you could tell by his record that he benefited from it greatly.
Now, we, in these days, baseball historians talk about how the pitching game has changed to the point where consideration for Hall of Fame candidacy, where the benchmark used to be 300 wins, now we're talking about guys like Roy Halladay next year and possibly Mike Messina, who didn't have 300 wins, but their other stats are so impressive that, and of course Messina won some World Series with the Yankees, but of course Roy Halladay never did, and that was almost another requirement to get into the Hall of Fame, to be on a World Championship team. But now, we're starting to look at other qualifications, and I think that speaks tremendously about the changes in the pitching game. Back in the time you played, the complete game was not unusual as it is today. Back then, you not only could have a complete game, but, in many games you'd face the starter and then the closer. Today, a hitter will face an average of 4 pitchers: the starter, a middle reliever, a setup guy, and then the closer. I guess my question here is, with all these so-called improvements, including analytics, including the greater emphasis on the mental approach to the game, what's going on here? I mean, why can't we have complete game performances anymore?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I've had a lot of discussions with folks over the last few years. And, one of the things that I come up with is that once the short man came in, and once the closer came in, and then once the setup man came in, they started paying these guys a lot of money to do that work. And I think that sometimes when you're paying somebody a lot of money to fill one of those roles, that you have to get them in the game. And so the manager is, I think he's duty bound to, find time to put them in when the situation occurs. In the olden days, which will never ever exist again, the reason why you were in the bullpen is because you couldn't start, and
right.
And so the manager would try to figure out the best way to get those guys into the game. Yeah, there started to be a closer later on with guys like Tug McGraw and countless others, Gossage and stuff, who. Dick Raditz was like a closer, but he would pitch 5 or 6 innings sometimes when he was in a ball game. But that just doesn't happen anymore. The way they condition their arms, the statistics that they have out there with regard to a new pitcher facing a hitter who's been in the game for already 3 or 4 at bats, it just is a whole different mentality.
Mm-hmm. Now, Jim, your playing career ended in 1979. You returned to New England, attended Tufts University School of Dental Medicine, excellent school, by the way, and eventually opened a dental practice. Did you ever have the desire to return to baseball? I mean, did you know in 1979 it was over, or could you have pitched longer?
No, I think the old arm had worn out. I always liken it to a rubber band that, just expands and contracts and expands and contracts, and then pretty soon it expands one time and it doesn't contract like it did to be healthy. And it was time. The stuff, the life in my arm had pretty much, disappeared. I could still throw, but I couldn't throw at a high level. So we had 5 kids at the time, and I knew when I was released that I wasn't going to, seek a career in baseball, because I really had to do something that was a little bit more substantial the word I'm looking for is more responsible, that I could control my life doing something that I had thought about doing for a long time anyway.
Mm-hmm. Now, you still live up in New England, correct?
We do. We have a beautiful home here in Scituate, Massachusetts. We've been living in this house for about 44 years now, and
wow.
We love being part of everything that happens in New England.
So, you big Red Sox fan still? Do you see many games?
Yeah, I get up to Fenway about once a month. The Red Sox have a nice program that they try to include the veteran old-time ball players come up and do hospitality nights in a special suite they have called the Legend Suite. So that's always fun. And then I try to get the grandkids up there at least once a year to watch a ball game.
Mm-hmm. Well, we certainly hope to see you in Philly, some alumni weekend. I don't know if you made it down here recently, but it would be great to see you back here again, because for a lot of us, you were part of our coming of age as a Philly, and were always a real gentleman, and one heck of a pitcher. So thanks for being with us, Jim, and thanks for your contributions to Phillies baseball.
Well, thank you, Bill. We have a fond place in our hearts for all of the years that we spent down in Philadelphia. It was a place where we found a new life in baseball, and we were able to. Our family actually started down there. We started with one adopted child, adopted two more after that, then had 3 more naturally, and so we left Philadelphia coming down as a happily married couple and left with happily married and with lots of kids. So it's always going to be a great spot in our hearts. And just as a side note, I am actually going to be with Larry Christensen this coming week. We're going to meet up in British Columbia to do some fishing. So I'm sure
wonderful.
I'm sure we can share some stories about our playing days in Philly.
Larry's a good man and has become a friend. Well, thanks again, Jim. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Philly fans, for tuning in. See you next week for another podcast of Philadelphia baseball, past, present, and personal. This is Bill Kashatus, rounding third and heading home on the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network.